perfect is just a perfect delivers a good basis to really trying to understand the world. That's like my kind of naive, uh, maybe not naive, but that was my approach when I decided to study chemistry. Actually, so I did that. I did my PhD in physical chemistry, and there I was working with spectroscopy. I investigated mechanisms of chemical reactions, for example. Yeah, and I did research for quite a couple of years. And I loved science and I loved research, but working in science is usually not forever. And there was also this like desire to somehow get involved into politics, which I all the years still like was in my mind. And in 2017, there was a chance for me to leave science for a job at a project management agency. They were organizing research funding programs basically for the Ministry of Research in Germany. And so I changed there. And this was my first step, like of broadening my view and coming from a scientist who really focuses on special problems in research with a very detailed view. Yeah, it was a chance to broaden my view and get closer to the policy aspects of research. So at this agency, I deal basically with research programs in circular economy, and also part of that is CCU technology, so carbon capture and utilization approaches. And yeah, like I said, so this job was the first step of coming from a detailed view to a more system view. And I like that a lot. And the next step was actually that I seized the chance in 2021 to change to the German federal ministry. Yeah, and there I am now, and it's part of my development from a scientist to I'm getting more and more a generalist with a strong scientific background, um, which brings really other opportunities, and I'm really happy with that decision. And here in the ministry, I'm part of the division for bioeconomy. And yeah, my topics are especially industrial bioeconomy, also biotechnology, and related to your program or your topic of the workshop. The topics I'm dealing are, for example, proteins from fermentation or cultured meat, for example. So very interesting, mainly technical innovations in this field. Yeah, and maybe I can leave it for this. So I try to draw a picture what brought me to the ministry, and then we can maybe open up the discussion and I can answer your
Yes.
questions and or tell you more about my day-to-day work.
Yeah, well, thank you for the interesting introduction. It's very nice to see that you well shifted a little bit from the research background to the more policy background. I don't know, you can ask questions in the chat, or you can just raise your hand and ask a question for Enrico yourself. But maybe, well, one of the questions I already have is indeed like, what's your day to day, or like, how does a day for you, how does it work, or what are your main, points you work on in your day to day job?
Yeah, I mean, it's a to me it's a very interesting job. Of course, I'm spending most of the time in my office. That's clear. But if I try to describe the job, then there are different really interesting categories. For example, one is certainly analysis of what are hot topics in research, what are stakeholder positions. So we're not only dealing with universities or research institutions, we're dealing with companies, we're dealing with NGOs. So what are their positions? From this analysis, one of my tasks is to advise actual political decision makers to work out proposals, opportunities, or draw like possibilities how certain problems, how you could deal with certain problems. Analysis, advising. One very important aspect is communication. So we're dealing with stakeholders from the whole society. We have to know what their positions, and we have to communicate and have a constant exchange with them. Conferences, interesting. That's a very nice part of my job. And then, of course, there are, when I'm responsible for research programs, there are aspects of administration. We're spending public money. This brings some requirements, how to spend them, of course. And this is the administrative part. Luckily, I have people who are very good at that in my division or at our project management agencies who do most of the work in this area. And yeah, maybe the last part of it is that you don't need to underestimate is actually coordination. So government is like a tank ship. I apologize for providing such a fossil image, but we are just one part of on this tank ship before something can move into a certain direction. So coordination between all these people in government on different levels, dealing with different topics, is a big part of my job, and it's very important because finally you want to have some coherency in politics. So this is the reason for this part. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So I can imagine that there's a lot happening at different levels. So as you mentioned, like coordination is a big part. But how do you make sure then that everything is aligned also with other maybe departments indeed? Do you have different teams who are working on different looking for synergies or alignment with other departments?
Yes. So there are teams who are, for example, dealing with bioeconomy in the federal government. So we are the Ministry for Education and Research. So at the beginning of the week, I was in a intense discussion with the Ministry for Economy, for Agriculture, and for Environment, for example. So this is one level. Then there are other working groups, I would say, who try to integrate German federal policy within the federal countries. So we have in Germany 16 federal countries who also have their activities in bioeconomy, of course. So this is the other level. And yeah, then there is the EU, with different programs, strategies, consultations, which is then another level. So yeah, basically it's exchanging documents, commenting documents, being in meetings and exchange rounds to finally have a consolidated version of something.
Yes. Are there any questions from the participants? You can just raise your hand if you would like to ask something. Otherwise, maybe one last question then maybe for myself. How do you make sure that you stay informed? Like there's like research is evolving very quickly. So how can you make sure that you have the latest information, or like you are aware what's happening at the different well, in the different aspects?
Yeah. So you're right. This is a huge challenge, and it would probably, if I wouldn't have support, I wouldn't be able to be updated in this field of bioeconomy. So in our division, for example, we are basically 8 people. Well, 3 like being on working like on the topics actually, like me. But we have project management agencies, agency who that are basically 80 very good educated people, almost everyone an expert in its field with a PhD and a history of research, and they are like having more time to reading actual funding proposals, literatures, studies, reviews, and something, and the exchange to this project management agency is really essential for me to stay updated, actually.
Thank you. I see Edith Veskens has raised her hand. Please go ahead.
Yes, I was just listening to Enrico's story, and as a professor, I also educate students, of course, so I'm always thinking to prepare them well. So if you look back at your, let's say, education, did it prepare you well for the position you are now in, or what would you advise us, universities, for example, to do to train more people to be fit for your type of work?
I would say, although I'm not really doing anymore what I learned at university, it trained me well, actually. I mean, we're now in a career session, which always encourages people to think about their future, making plans and everything. And this is important. So this is great. Everybody who has a clear objective, this is a good advantage, and you should work with that. And the other thing, to my view, is really to be keen on getting to know things, to understand things, to go deeper into certain problems. And with that, if you're actually enthusiastic about this, about understanding what's the key of what's actually the problem, might it be political, might it be a scientific, technical problem? If you're enthusiastic about that, that's at least my experience, you develop competencies that you won't lose anymore in your life, and you can somehow transfer to other problems. So one part of my, so I would say, yes, it was a great experience. Research helped me a lot. And I'm now working in an environment where of course, there are scientists like, or people who were scientists like me, But there are also people who could have become lawyers or something, who study politics. And what is really interesting is bringing together these perspectives. The Ministry of Education and Research is really, therefore, the very interesting ministry, because we have like 20% scientists, 30% of people who could have become a lawyer, or this is really interesting. And to see how still just follow the different approaches of people with this different background, and this is like this key for I guess developing good policies. Also, this variety of perspectives, actually.
Thank you. Well, maybe now we can make a small bridge to, because Edith Veskens also will explain a little bit about what she achieved during her career already. So I give the floor to you, Edith, and then we can
thank you.
Thereafter open the discussion again.
Yeah, I asked this question to Enrico because and I will reflect on his answer later. So maybe to explain, I'm currently a professor of global nutrition in Wageningen University, and I was trained in Wageningen a while ago as a nutrition scientist, so to study nutrition and health. And then thereafter, I did a PhD. So I went to Leiden University Medical School for an epidemiological thesis, PhD thesis. But then my professor, he went to RIVM, the Dutch National Public Health Institute, and he was able to bring all scientific staff. So I went along. So I finalized my PhD while working at the Public Health Institute, and I stayed there for another 16 years. So that was also really very nice. So actually, I did my PhD on an epidemiological topic. And then immediately afterwards, I became, heading the cardiovascular diabetes epidemiology. And I learned a lot, not only from leading a group, but also staying in contact with people from the ministry. So we do, let's say, policy support research at that point. Now, I must say, after a while, I got a little bit uneasy because, the questions were not always scientifically very interesting. And somehow it became some repetition. So I later in 2005, I was asked by Wageningen University to apply. They had a position for an associate professor. I applied and I got the job. So I changed back to university, my alma mater. And in the beginning, I had to adapt a lot because in a research institute, there's always a strategy, and you know what to do every year because there are research questions from the government and so on. And in a university, you can do whatever you like, and I loved it. Of course, I stayed in with my topic, but I also studied other things. So in the end, that's why I know quite a lot of different topics, not very deeply, but I worked on elderly, I worked on genetics, I worked on many different things. Most recently, also sustainability and low and middle income countries. So at that time, I had to learn how to teach, because that was something, of course, which was lacking at RIVM. But that I enjoyed a lot, and I really still like to stay in touch and lecture. I don't lecture a whole course anymore, of course, but in every period I lecture courses. I do methodological things. I connect with master students and with bachelor students, and I love that. I really like that. I always say it also keeps me young, but I'm not sure if that's true, but I think it does. And then I became a personal professor in 2008 and a chair. So then responsibility for a real group of 10 or 15 scientists, civic staff, 5 postdocs, and about 50 PhD students at the moment. And at the same time, we are included in a division of human nutrition and health. So we are 5 different chair groups, and I'm also co-leading the whole group. And in that period of time, I also became acquainted with the JPI HDHL. first as a principal investigator of an awarded project, as a member of the scientific advisory board, and in the later years as chair of the scientific advisory board. And what I think, I also like that a lot because, well, you notice a little bit from my history, I am an epidemiologist and a nutrition scientist, and I like many different topics, which can be a pitfall, but is a good thing when you are a scientific advisory board chair, because it's good to have a little bit broader view on things. So where we had in the SAP, we discussed the food sciences, the diet and health, but also the behavioral part and the upstream drivers of food and health. I was able to relate to all of them. And that is because in my training in Wageningen, I did both the natural sciences track as well as the social sciences track. So I did some extra things. So that is a little bit the history, how I came to be here. And maybe, Bernadette, you have some specific questions, but in addition to what Enrico said, I think in academia, I value the academic freedom, but it's also good to realize that it's also team science. It's not, the best things are not being done completely on your own. The things we discussed this morning, the ultra-processed foods or the food systems, more and more wicked problems come on our way. And there are a lot of trade-offs in, let's say promoting one policy rule or another. And these trade-offs are very important and impact society. And it's very good to understand at least other disciplines and the language of other disciplines, to get in the dialogue with them, and also to see what potential bottlenecks or unwanted side effects can happen if, for example, you would like to ban ultra-processed food as an example. But I think that is important.
Well, thank you. We're of course very happy to have you as a chair from our scientific advisory board.
Yes, thank you.
So as you mentioned, there's probably a little bit a shift then towards how science was maybe done before and how research and researchers are interacting now. And
yes, maybe I can add on that, Bernadette, because what I see happening, and that is a discussion we have in university, and I'm also happy to hear Enrico's views. What we say in university, at least in our university, we talk a lot about T-shaped skills, the T, the capital T. So you'd like scientists to go in depth, right? So they really know everything which is to know about a certain compound in the food or whatever. At the same time, you need people who are more generalizers and who see more the holistic picture. And ideally, every student is somewhere in that T, but also realize that there is another part in the T. And ideally, I would say, well, in myself, I'm a little bit in the cross of the T, but I'm more on the broader sense, the generalized sense, than in the deeper sense, so to speak. And I think that's useful for young people to realize that. Maybe you relate to that yourself, Bernadette, I don't know.
Well, I'm going to think about it. It's
Okay,
an interesting fact. Yeah.
Good.
If anyone has a question for Edith Veskens, please raise your hand and we can give you the floor. Something I was wondering is, well, how much time or do you, for example, have for education or for research or for other activities? Because I can imagine that there's a lot of things happening and that a lot of activities needs to be addressed.
Yeah. In my role as chair and professor, I have, let's say, teaching obligations. Well, normally as academic staff in Wageningen, we say 50-50. So every researcher also needs to do education. And that is because we'd like to be the education on top of things. So like saying, if you develop something new in research, immediately or quite quickly, it can be transferred into the curriculum of the bachelor and master students. So that's the philosophy of our university. And I think it works very well. having said that, I, of course, have less education, not much research myself, only through PhD students, and nowadays through staff members who have PhD students. And there's a lot of management. Now, the management that sounds boring is also sometimes, boring in that terms, in terms of admin. Luckily, we share the admin burden a little bit. But there's also something as leadership, and I think that that is different from management. Management is just making sure everything runs as it should run, and we have a manager of operations for that. But leadership is more like, you're a visionary, strategic, and also important to network. I think my role is not so much anymore into. I do that still, helping PhD students with their chapters and so on the data analysis, but more also on acquisition, getting new projects, of doing agenda setting, like in the new networks and partnerships, to make sure that future generations of young people, early career researchers, can work on the right topics, or at least the topics we feel are, the topics of the near future or the long-term future. So that is also a role I like very much, the networking part. And I think also that is something I'd like to convey to young researchers. Don't underestimate, networking is important. A tip: network based on your knowledge, and don't network and go to say have drinks and just have superficial talks and have a selfie with someone famous. That will not help so much. It should be, based on the content. That's at least how I like to network. It should be, it needs to mean something, not superficial things. Yeah. So in my time then, I spent it's more than 40 hours a week. That is also something to realize, Bernadette, and young people. That is voluntarily. I'm not forced to do that, but I like my work. So I like what I do. So indeed, in the evenings, I read papers, or in the weekends, I read papers of students. And that is, well, normal still, although I wonder whether the younger generations would like to do it in the way we are old guys, let's say, were raised. And of course, I always say also to my staff, you're not obliged to work so many hours, surely not. Be creative, and also be, let's say, focus. And that is sometimes difficult, because if you are enthusiastic of many things, you say yes to many things. So we need to say no on a polite way, and make choices, especially in the phase where you have a young family. It's impossible to do everything that you want. It's only 24 hours in a day, only 7 days in a week. And, in that case, I would always also say to my younger self, don't be so impatient. Things will come in due time.
Thank you. And maybe I see a question also in the chat, maybe a little bit picking up on, you mentioned networking is a big part of getting further. So does university support students in the networking, and also in working with policy or society?
Yeah, that's a very good questions. A couple of years ago, in my own group, we have annual meetings where we discuss also the development of the PhD students and the postdocs, and they really asked us senior staff to help with networking. And that is something I feel we as senior staff in any case need to be aware of and need to do. So I'll try to do that often, to bring along young people to conferences, for example, or to webinars. But we can do that more. And also officially things, well, I'm not sure whether there's a course on networking, but being a personal example, or have personal examples and actual help with networking and get people in contact will really work. I am now a member of the IONS, is the International Nutrition Sciences Society, as a board member, and I must say I am 62. I'm probably the youngest board member, which is awkward. So we also said, also in our Dutch Nutrition Society, we should bring in younger people, or maybe also, you know, set up a board of younger people or younger people to help us to run some of the conferences, etc. So be more aware of that. And I think there are still groups who are not so aware of that, you know, we should actively involve early career and mid-career researchers also in boards like this. So it's a matter of awareness. And I think the university can help. Well, you know, sometimes it's a matter of money. I think nowadays with online, it's good, but for real networking, live meetings are better. And not only on content, but also to have a dinner and have some drinks and let's say, you know, have some fun and talk about other things like, you know, children who don't want to eat vegetables and fruit or whatever, your own children, I mean. So, I mean, this will help enormously. And I must say that in all the EU project I've been member of in since you know, the last 30 years, including JPI, I've met many friends and good colleagues all over Europe. And I still, you know, I know when I'm on a holiday, I can drop by and say hello there. I mean, you know, you establish some sort of friendships with the people you learn, you get acquainted with in these projects. And that is so valuable also. So live contact should be promoted in these cases.
Yeah. I see another question. Have you run any transnational projects, and what are the advantages and challenges of these kinds of projects? And maybe it's also interesting to see, well, we also talk about transdisciplinary projects, of course. So maybe we can have a little bit also the view of Enrico on this, but please go ahead, Edith, if you
Shall I
want to start.
Yes. Yes, I have been involved in various projects. I must say, well, the first one is an intervention study which I started myself as an academic intervention, a combined lifestyle intervention to prevent diabetes. Then I collaborated with the municipalities the GGD, the health parts of the municipalities in the Netherlands to get it to real life and to test the effectiveness and effectivity and cost effectiveness in real life situations. And there we also include health economics, behavioral scientists, etc., physiotherapists, dietitians, obviously, general practitioners. And also we didn't co-create that intervention with the participants themselves, but in a later spin-off with socioeconomic disadvantaged people, we did qualitative research. And again, I didn't do that on my own, but we were a team. And I liked that a lot. And we based our, let's say, targeted intervention or behavioral intervention on the people from Turkish and Moroccan origin, really based on the input we got from this qualitative work. So, and in the end, there I said at some time, I said, okay, well, here is my, you know, my personal expertise a little bit. This is the boundary of my personal expertise. At some stage, by scaling up and rolling it out as part of the basic health insurance in the Netherlands, that requires different people, that requires different expertise. So I help them, set them up, and then, you know, I still advise if they need, but that is out of my hands. And I think that is also not a part of a university's job anymore. So that is also the reason I decided that. Having said that, I think, and that is also I'd like to advocate, we need to train our students better in implementation or implementation science to get, Bernadette, this easier boundary crossing, because that is something, if you haven't done it or haven't experienced it yourself or know how to approach this, it's more difficult to do. And implementation science is also a respected science. It's now scattered in our university, also in the Netherlands. I know it's some part in the medical schools, but not really in nutrition. So I really want to set up courses or a course at least for especially first maybe the PhDs on implementation science, because they are working on topics of which you hope they will get implemented in the future. But some topics can already be implemented quite fast. And to make them more aware of that, but also the things which needs to be done, or let's say the information you need to convince a stakeholder, like a cost effectiveness analysis, etc., is very important, I think, and to take that up as a part of our curriculum one way or another. So yes, I have experience, but yeah, to some extent. But I'd like to have young people even get more experience in that.
Thank you. And of
I
course,
hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think so. And indeed, implementation, of course, two ways. You have the implementation in society and in practice, but also in politics. So I don't know, Enrico, Bas, if you have anything to add to the question.
Yeah, sure. So first, I would like really strongly support what Edith said. Also strengthen young people to cross borders. Individuals really benefit from that, but also from a politics perspective. So now I'm changing really. Let me just change the perspective on that. We are funding very strong interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary projects. Why is that? Science and research, at least to my view, I think the interaction of science to society, this is changing. So science is not a spaceship somewhere where smart people think about serious problems. It's in the middle of our society. In Germany, we spend 3% of the GDP on research and innovation. This is good money, to be very clear. It can be even a little more to my personal perspective because research is so important. But we all know that we have challenges also including concerning democracy. I mean, we have our problems in Germany. You have problems in our challenges in the Netherlands, I'm sure. Research and science must be seen by the society to somehow a contribution to a great challenges, to provide some answers, not to strengthen the feeling of being overwhelmed. To my view, this is also a role of that science and research has to play, and which gets more important in the next year. And this changes research and science. So this changes the topics that we fund, transdisciplinary and interdisciplinary topics who can contribute as potential solutions to grand challenges, climate change, getting rid of substituting fossil fuels. And it changes how actually scientists work, like science communication, how to communicate with people who are not from your specific discipline, communicate to other disciplines, and communicate to your neighbor about what you're doing. This it gets more and more important, and I'm very happy to see that young researchers also find that more important.
Yes, thank you. And maybe also then to follow up, the way that policy and science are interacting now. So that's part of course, the communication and the network that Edith was talking about. But is the way about how policy and science are interacting now a good way, or what is, in your opinion, what would work best to provide information, or yeah, from a science perspective?
So I think if you're comparing, if you're having a big perspective, then we are very good in our societies to give research and science a voice in politics. If you compare it, so in Germany, in the Netherlands, in Germany, we have a lot of councils who advise the government on specific policy topics. And this is very important because the actual decision makers can't know really about the things in detail. So of course they need the input from science, and I think the mechanisms are quite well established. Of course, as a scientist, you always would feel why isn't it going faster, or why can't we do it, or just like I understand these feelings, but the process of politics is, yeah, it's another process, and we have to respect that. And to my view, we can be very proud of already what we have, and we need to work on that and fight for a knowledge base policies, fight for knowledge-based policies. This will be a challenge for the next years anyway, actually.
Yeah, maybe I can add on that. I've put also in the chat a link to a course, because that was also a question from Ingeborg. We developed a course, at least my colleagues from the food policy, they developed a course on politics of healthy and sustainable food. And that is also to warn our nutrition studies students, which are life sciences students, to say, indeed, to warn them for the disappointment. And Rico mentioned that, well, we have good solutions, but then, well, on average, I take it takes 17 years for something is really implemented in practice. Maybe nowadays that is a little bit quicker, but indeed, the hurdles are always there. It's the money, it's the people, it's the stakeholders, and that you can easily depict. And we debate that also, and also prepare for disappointment. Indeed, we had a lovely program. I already told you. Combined lifestyle intervention on diet and physical activity. And at that time, 15 years ago, the minister at that time said, the Minister of Public Health, well, I do already a lot on alcohol, so I don't want to nanny the people in the nanny state about, eating less or exercising more. So sorry, no room for that. So he focused on his alcohol policy. And that is always, of course, a disappointment, and then you get frustrated. But that is life. There are so many other stakeholders there, and that's why we need convincing data, good data, as I also discussed this morning, to really make a case in this knowledge-based policies. And also the politicians, that is something unpredictable sometimes for us, because that in a discussion earlier this week, people said, well, we just need good politicians and also good voters. Well, yes, that is now an issue in some of the countries, but that also comes back to our transparency, as Enrico rightly says. We use public money, so we should be held accountable, and people should see what we do and what we can add. And I think the good thing for science was the COVID epidemic, that we saw that within a few months the vaccine was there, or at least studied. Within 1 year there were vaccines developed and being rolled out. I mean, that I think is a prime example that medical research is really, really contributing a lot to society. And this you cannot predict, but I think use that in communication as a good example that science really contributes to society, and that is not a hobby for some world strange professors doing something in their own ivory tower. No, we work on concrete problems and we try to provide concrete solutions, but indeed life is complex. It's not always the silver bullet. I'd like to keep, I hope this clarifies a little bit. Nice discussion, Bernadette. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the interesting answers as well. And maybe also looking in the chat, Enrico, do you also, Edith mentioned about implementation research. Are you also in policy now? Trying to increase the research implementation as well, or support the implementation of research into practice?
Yes, of course. Like putting working out or bringing results from research into practice, this is one of our main tasks, and we can't do it alone. So we are spending a lot of public money on that, but different things have to come together. We need private money for that, and we need the suitable regulatories, and then we're back to what Edith just mentioned, the time scale where you adjust the boundary conditions might not match at all time to what we would need to really put research results into practice, to develop new processes, to open up markets for innovative products and something like that. But we should all respect democracy and constantly work on that, be aware of that problem, not get too frustrated about, but being proud of that we're a society where different voices can be heard.
Thanks. It's really nicely said, I think. And then another question is, how would you sell your scientific experience or skills to an employer that is not in your narrow scientific expertise?
I don't know what you mean with that, Bernadette. Or you're asking this to Enrico?
I think it's a question for Enrico.
Oh, okay,
It's
Enrico.
mentioned in the chat. So if
Okay.
the question is not clear enough, we can ask if anyone would like to clarify the question.
Yeah, that would be nice. I would be thankful for that.
I don't know who asked the question. Is anyone able to give a little bit of background?
I don't know.
Well, otherwise we go, because there are also other questions. So otherwise we go to the next one. This one is for Edith. What is your strategy to supervise a big group of students and postdocs? Is there any advice you can give to the people who are attending today?
Yeah, I said already, I answered a little quickly in the chat, but I'm happy to elaborate here. I think in a big group, your span of control is usually 20 people. So my group is bigger than that, maybe in total 70 to 80. My policy is not to micromanage things. So I have a good academic staff, so that is important, recruiting the right people, and also people with additional skills to what I myself have. That is important, content-wise and soft skills-wise. And I trust them, so I delegate a lot to them, and they have their postdocs and their PhD students and their master students, for example. So, and I look a little bit from a little bit more helicopter view, but I'll jump in when needed, wherever needed, in more detail. So that is a little bit my policy. So I'll try to do what is needed on the right time. And not have a fixed schedule or fixed things. And I think I learned this also doing this step by step. So if you're an early career person, a researcher, start with supervising with 1 or 2 students, but also reflect on that. So not only take it for granted, but take a moment and think, okay, what went well? What I could do better next time. Just also have good performance interviews with your colleagues and staff. Ask for feedback and take that into account, just to learn yourself and to improve. I mean, nobody is a perfect professor from the start, and even I am not at the end, but this is something you can learn step by step if you're consciously asking for feedback once in a while. Think about it yourself. And develop your skills. And for example, there are very good courses in time management or in project management or even in softer skills. So when you feel the need or you hear from people that you you are doing not so well yet on that topic, go ahead and follow a course or discuss with the coach. I mean, nowadays that is perfectly normal, and every university has budget for those things, because I think you have to realize that now with the baby boomers going retirement very soon already, it is very, very difficult for universities and research institutes to attract sufficient personnel. So, from that point of view, the future is yours. So there will be plenty of jobs soon. So if you prepare well, and they want to invest in you as well, because they see, professors leaving, and yeah, they need the shoes being filled. So I think there are huge opportunities for you in the near future.
Thank you for this enlightening answer. Then maybe one last question that is asked in the chat. It's a question for Enrico. Has there been any discussions on how to overcome challenges that somehow Western European countries face in terms of representations? How to have a more inclusivity from them?
I'm not sure. Can you say that again? I had connection problems actually.
Oh, yeah, no worries. I think you can also, I don't know if you can see the chat, but
yeah, I'll try.
It's the last one. So are there any challenges on how to overcome, oh, sorry, has there been any discussions on how to overcome challenges that somehow Western European countries face in terms of representation? So how have a more inclusivity from them?
You mean representation?
Let's say in research European transnational projects. Maybe it's a question that builds on the first question that was addressed about transnational projects. Anyone who would like to elaborate a little bit on the question? I don't know who asked the question. Are you willing to speak up and ask the question directly?
Yeah, sorry, I just don't. I'm not sure whether I get the question right. Are you talking about representation of each countries in EU projects?
Yeah, in European transnational projects, I think is mentioned in the chat.
Okay,
maybe, yeah.
So you mean that countries can somehow equally, so each countries can participate in project, or I'm not sure whether I get the question right. Is it a question about EU project fundings?
I think one of the issues maybe is that so. If we look at research, translational research, that maybe it's more like a Western representation in the project. Is that also the case? And maybe then how can we make sure that everyone is included in transnational research? So to really stimulate a broader audience in the project.
Yeah. Okay. Now, so there are different aspects. Of course, we have with the EU project funding a very good instrument to bring together people from different countries participating in transnational projects. But that's only one part. For example, in the German Federal Ministry, in the field of bioeconomy, we have a program that's called Bioeconomy International, where we provide or make it possible for German researchers to cooperate with people from other nations, from other countries, from Vietnam, from Brazil, from Australia. We have projects with them. So this is one part, or another part, adding to the EU projects, and we are constantly actually developing new possibilities. For example, we're now next week I will discuss with people from the US about from Department of State about possibilities of putting something together with the United States, for example. And yeah, so there are a lot of discussion rounds in that, and the German ministry has an actual strategy for internationalization of research. I can share that in the chat if I'm technically able. So there are a lot of instruments actually who try to contribute to a very international research. Yeah.
Yes.
Does that
Thank you.
answer your question?
I think it is. Apologies for the confusion about the question. I'm also looking at the time, although I think there are still some questions out there. But thank you both, Edith and Enrico, for the very nice insight into your day-to-day job and how we can well strengthen the collaboration, I think, between science, policy, and also implementation into practice. So thank you for that. And then maybe also thanks again to Ingeborg and Megan who joined us in the first part. Yasmina for the moderation. So to wrap up a little bit the webinar, I think we started the morning session with well, are ultra-processed food a problem, or are they part of the solution? And if so, how can we make sure that ultra-processed foods are then maybe more healthy? There's also a lot of confusion for the consumer. So how can we make sure to decrease or avoid this confusion and support them to make a conscious choice? So the focus should not be on education of consumers, but on facilitating a more affordable and healthy choice through a combination of, for example, taxation and incentivization. And then lastly, there are, of course, many factors that are affecting the choice that consumers make. So the problem is very clear about ultra-processed food, but the solution is probably very complex. And Megan shared that a system approach should be taken, so improving the food environment and the foodscapes. So that in a few words, well, I don't know if the whole webinar can be summarized in a few words. I think there were so many interesting discussions, and also in the breakout rooms, it was very nice to see that there was interaction with everyone. If there are any questions that are still, well, that participants want to ask, you can always send an email, and we'll try to answer it afterwards. But said that, I want to thank all the speakers today who joined us, and also everyone who joined during this webinar for the active participation and all the questions that you asked. Thank you, and we hope to see you next time.
Yes, thank you all. Thanks for organizing. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.